Hello everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Medisodes. This week, we're going to be discussing COVID-19 variants, what they are, why and how they mutate, and the risks that they pose to society, global health, and Britain's roadmap out of lockdown. COVID-19 variants can completely change the landscape of managing COVID-19, and their unpredictability means that we can only react to them, rather than being overly proactive and prevent them from forming in the first place. Several terms may be used when referring to different strains of a virus or other organism, but they mean slightly different things. The term variant is used to refer to viruses that have had mutations to their RNA, compared to the parental strain. But why do they then not become a new strain? The factor that differentiates a variant of a parental strain from a completely different new strain is the behavior of the virus. Mutations do not necessarily change the fundamental behavior of a virus, though they might change it to some extent, and so this is not defined as a new strain. If a mutation were to cause a change in the virus behavior, then this would be classed as a new strain completely. A variant is referred to as a new strain when it shows distinct physical properties to the parent strain. All of the variants of COVID-19 have been identified so far are not significantly different in their behavior compared to the parent strain. They cause similar symptoms of similar severity and are transmitted in similar ways. Of course, with changes in the RNA leading to identification as a variant, there will be some small changes in the virus behavior. Though it has been identified that the COVID-19 variants cause similar symptoms to each other, other concerns have been raised, such as changes in transmissibility, changes in the severity of infection, and slight changes in the symptoms. Currently, the most topical variant of COVID-19 is the one first identified in India, and, given the surge in cases that we have seen there in recent months, there is a fear that the Indian variant is more easily transmitted than the parental strain. However, this rapid spread of COVID-19 in India is to be partially attributed to the high population density in large cities, which enables faster and easier transmission. Scientists are currently investigating the Indian variant to see if there is a significant increase in how easily it is transmitted, as well as checking if the current vaccines are effective against it. If the current vaccines are ineffective against this variant, or indeed any other variant, then new vaccinations would have to be developed from scratch, a process that would delay Britain's, and indeed the rest of the world's, roadmap out of lockdown. As of now, scientists have suggested that the variant displays less severe symptoms in those who are vaccinated, compared to the unvaccinated people, which indicates that the vaccines are doing as they were intended. Remember that the vaccine was not intended to give immunity, but rather to lessen the severity of infection and symptoms, which then leads to reduced hospitalization to allow the NHS to be able to cope better with the number of COVID-19 patients, and reduces the number of people who unfortunately will die from COVID-19 infection. If you would like more information about each of the different vaccines, how they work, and their relative merits and disadvantages, be sure to check out Medisodes episode 1, which I'll link in the description for your convenience. Of course, the variant of COVID-19 first identified in India is not the only variant of COVID-19. As of the 17th of May 2021, the government website lists 12 variants of COVID-19 present in the UK that have been identified, including 5 first identified in England, 3 first identified in India, and others from various other countries. Currently, there is no standard naming system for the different variants of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, so they are referred to informally by the country in which they were first identified, which has caused some concern over correctness. The World Health Organization has stated that it is working on an international naming system to provide names for variants that are both geographically and politically neutral. In the UK, the formal names given to variants of the SARS-CoV-2 virus start with VUI, which stands for Variant Under Investigation, or VOC, which stands for Variant of Concern. Then there are the final 2 digits of the year of identification, so 21 for 2021, followed by 3 letters to mark the month of identification, for example APR for April. Finally, 2 digits are added to the end of the name to represent the order of variant identification in that month. For example, the name VOC 20DEC01 refers to a variant of concern first identified in December 2020. In this case, this variant was first identified in England. New variants, if considered to have concerning epidemiological, immunological, or pathogenic properties, are designated a variant under investigation, and, following a risk assessment by the relevant committee, they may be then designated variant of concern. It is important to note that lateral flow tests, the type of testing that is used for home tests and mass testing schemes, does not differentiate between variants, but there is confidence that they can identify all the currently known variants of SARS-CoV-2. So these tests cannot be used to count the number of confirmed cases of each type of variant. So instead PCR, standing for polymerase chain reaction testing, is used. I shall also link Medisodes episode 9 in the description, in which we talk about the different types of COVID-19 testing. Now I will hand over to Surya, who will be talking about the mechanisms behind virus mutations and variant formation.
All viruses naturally mutate as they spread through a population. The SARS-CoV-2 virus is an mRNA virus and is therefore more prone to mutations than DNA viruses such as smallpox. There are many variants of COVID-19 causing concern about the effectiveness of vaccines, such as the B1617.2 Indian variant, the B117 Kent variant, and the South African variant. With the existence of these variants, it is important to understand how RNA viruses mutate. First of all, it is important to understand that SARS-CoV-2 virus is a virus which mutates relatively slower compared to other RNA viruses. This is because most RNA viruses do not have a proofreading mechanism, which is a mechanism that can help fix errors during the replication of genetic material during the life cycle of the virus. And this lack of proofreading in most RNA viruses means that they can undergo several mutations due to the lack of inaccuracy in RNA replication. However, the SARS-CoV-2 virus is a virus which has a proofreading mechanism and is therefore less likely to produce a large number of mutations. However, even with this, the SARS-CoV-2 virus has undergone some mutations, as mentioned previously. And now let's look at how an RNA virus, such as the SARS-CoV-2 virus, would replicate in the process to produce mutations. In order for RNA viruses to replicate, the genetic material of the virus must first enter the host cell. Once the RNA of the virus is in the host cell, the RNA will be translated into amino acids by the organelles in the host cell called ribosomes. When these amino acids are joined together by peptide bonds, a protein is formed. A sequence of 3 bases determines the amino acid that is being coded for. However, during translation, sometimes the wrong base is added, and hence a different amino acid may be coded for, and hence a different protein may be produced. Most mutations won't result in the amino acid changing because one amino acid can be coded for by multiple triplet codes. However, occasionally a different amino acid could be produced due to a mistake during translation of the viral RNA. Since amino acids affect the structure and function of a virus, changes in the amino acids being coded for can cause changes to the shape and infectiousness of the virus. For example, mutation to the spike protein of the SARS-CoV-2 virus could result in protective antibodies from not binding to the virus. This can mean that the rate of transmission of the virus could increase because the binding of the SARS-CoV-2 virus spike proteins to the angiotensin converting enzyme 2 receptors is what allows the viral RNA to enter the human host cells. The lack of binding of protective antibodies to the spike proteins means that there is more successful binding of the ACE2 receptors to the SARS-CoV-2 spike proteins. This means that the mutations to certain parts of the spike protein could cause the infectiousness of the SARS-CoV-2 virus to increase. Another important point to consider is that more unfavorable the conditions are for the virus, the more likely it is to develop beneficial mutations and less likely to develop harmful mutations. The transmissibility of COVID-19 by means of droplet infection is quite high, and the conditions are not against the spread of the virus. Therefore, currently, the rate of beneficial mutations is quite low compared to the frequency of harmful and neutral mutations. And now on to Shrey, who will be discussing the effects of mutations on the COVID-19 variants.
There are many different variants going around at the moment in the UK, and the two that I'm going to talk about are the English variant and the Indian variant. The English variant, also known as the Kent variant or the B117 variant, has 17 different genetic changes from the original Wuhan variant of coronavirus. And these affect the spike proteins, those crown-shaped extensions that stick out from the coronavirus. And these spike proteins help the virus to attach to human cells in the nose, lungs, and other areas of the body and allow it to infect cells. And research has shown that the B117 variant can bind more tightly to cells due to the mutations in the spike protein. And this means that the new strains are stickier and they're harder for the body to fight. This variant is particularly contagious and it's by far the most widespread. Another variant that in recent weeks has caused concern is the Indian variant or the B1617 variant. But although it's at early stages for this variant and we don't have much data, we can conclude some things. It does have several important mutations, which may make it easier to pass on or make it resistant to the immune response to the virus. And these include the L452R mutation, and this helps the virus escape the immune response, including antibodies, which attach to the virus to help neutralize it, and immune cells, which help to directly attack the virus and the infected cells. There's also evidence that it can affect how well the virus binds to ACE2 receptors on the surface of our cells, and this is how the virus gets into our cells. So this mutation could potentially make it even more infectious. It also has the P681R mutation, which is also present in other variants such as the Kent strain, and it's also thought that this may make it easier for the virus to spread. Also, there are two sublineages called the B16171 and B16773, which also carry the E484Q mutation, which is similar to the E484K mutation first seen in the South African variant, another very infectious variant of coronavirus. This means that this mutation may help the virus escape the immune system. However, this does not mean vaccines do not provide any protection. It may just be reduced. So we've talked about the two most pressing variants, which is the Indian and the Kent variant in the UK, although there are many other important variants that we need to be mindful of. And now Anupam is going to be talking about why these new variants could be dangerous and what effects they have.
These COVID variants have two main effects on the current response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And these two are slightly different, but they have a huge impact on the way we come out of this crisis. The first one is how they affect vaccine effectiveness. The emergence of a SARS-CoV-2 variant, which is fully or even moderately resistant to the antibody response caused by the current generation of COVID-19 vaccines, could spell disaster for many nations' vaccine rollout programs and might even necessitate modification to these vaccines. Trial data has indicated many vaccines developed for the initial strain have marked lower efficacy against symptomatic COVID-19. However, as of February 2021, in the United States, their Food and Drug Administration, or FDA, believe all currently authorized vaccines, that is, authorized by them, not other global bodies, are still effective against currently circulating strains. So they do still recommend that these vaccines are the go-to for any version of coronavirus. However, some specific strains have shown resistance to the various vaccines around the world. For example, the B1351 variant, or South African variant, for example, has shown decreased neutralizing activity when the Moderna and Pfizer-BioNTech vaccines were used.
The Johnson & Johnson vaccine also saw a 15% decrease in level of protection between the United States and South Africa when trialled. The Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine was demonstrated to have reduced efficacy against this variant, to the point where 1 million planned doses of the vaccine were suspended for delivery by the Minister of Health for South Africa, whilst data was examined on how to proceed. And the Novavax vaccine's preliminary efficacy for this variant was only 51% as of March 2021. So this single South African variant has neutralized the efficacy almost of 5 different of the world's major vaccines that are being delivered. As you can see, this is a huge problem. But it's not just the South African variant. The P1, or the Brazil variant, has been seen to partially escape vaccination protection against the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. And the B1617, or Indian variant, has 15 defining mutations. And some of the spike mutations, especially two, which are E484Q and L452R, are actually helping it avoid antibodies. In an update on the 15th of April, Public Health England actually designated that variant, the Indian variant, as under investigation because of its effects on the vaccine rollout in the UK. But even beyond their effect on the vaccines, these new variants actually have an effect on how coronavirus is spreading, and in most cases, they are increasing the spread. There is no evidence that any of them cause much more serious illness, especially for the vast majority of people. And just like the original version of COVID, the risk remains highest for people who are elderly or have significant underlying health conditions. But by becoming more infectious and equally dangerous, will lead to more deaths in the unvaccinated population as a whole. The Health Secretary of the UK, Matt Hancock himself, told the House of Commons on Monday that while the B1617.2 variant seemed more transmissible, the evidence suggested vaccines were still effective against it. He also said that it might even become the dominant strain in parts of northwest England. He then went on to inform MPs of the latest scientific assessment of the Indian variant and said that early evidence suggested this variant was even more transmissible than the Kent or UK variant that emerged last year. Of course, that variant itself is much more transmissible than the original COVID variant. So we can see how these mutations are causing the virus to become even more infectious. SAGE, or the Scientific Advisory Group for Emergencies, has said there is a realistic possibility that the Indian coronavirus variant could be as much as 50% more transmissible than the UK variant. England's Chief Medical Officer, Professor Chris Whitty, said, "We expect over time this variant to overtake and come to dominate in the UK. But at present, again, there is no evidence that it is resistant to vaccines, and that data from Oxford University and hospitals around the UK has shown that the vaccines are still effective." All in all, COVID variants are a very real risk, and it's big news every time a new one is discovered, especially one that spreads across the world, like the Indian, Brazilian, and South African variants have done, and the UK variant as well. However, as of now, we have been very lucky that they have not affected vaccine rollout, and if things continue the way they are, it is predicted that vaccines will be spread to the point that variants will stop being produced. And now I'm going to hand over to Adrian to wrap up.
Thank you. So I hope we've given you a good coverage of the COVID-19 variants, how they form, how they affect today's society, and our roadmap out of lockdown. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Medisodes. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.